The gavel cracked like thunder, and the courtroom froze around its echo. Maya Hale said, "This is not the truth," but her voice barely crossed the rail. Rain needled the windows and smeared the city into watery streaks. Elias Reed said, "Breathe, Maya," and his calm felt like a soft bandage over a severed vein. Jax Rivera watched from the last row, 16 and feral bright, clutching a sketchbook and a secret. Dana Brooks said, "We appeal," while her knuckles blanched against a legal pad. Victor Lang smiled without teeth from the gallery balcony, a velvet shadow tasting the air. The judge stared down as if the verdict had been waiting inside him for years. A phone vibrated in Maya's coat, a number she had not seen since the night Lila disappeared. Maya Hale said, "Not now," and pressed the sealed letter in her pocket, as if paper could anchor a drowning heart. Outside the courthouse, thunder stitched the sky while cameras fed on grief. Maya Hale said, "They called my truth a story," and her breath fogged the wet air. Elias Reed said, "We build again," and he held the umbrella like a shield. Dana Brooks said, "Chain of custody broke in transit," and her eyes searched for the missing link. Jax Rivera hovered near the steps, sketching her profile in quick slashes. Victor Lang watched from a black car, windows tinted to a thought. The phone buzzed again with the same unknown number. Maya Hale said, "Lila would laugh at this circus," and the word laughed was a fracture. A siren wailed, and the crowd parted with hungry patience. Rain rinsed the stone, but nothing came clean. In a narrow corridor, the verdict chased them like a rumor with teeth. Maya Hale said, "The hard drive vanished after intake," and the fluorescent hum felt accusatory. Dana Brooks said, "Manifest logged it, but the locker code changed." Elias Reed said, "We file for preservation now." Jax Rivera lingered at the corner, half shadow and listening. Victor Lang passed in the opposite flow, a silk tide that left the air colder. The phone vibrated a third time, patient and insistent. Maya Hale said, "If I answer, it becomes real," and the corridor shortened around her. A cleaning cart rattled as if applauding failure. Somewhere overhead, a pipe ticked like the last seconds of mercy. They reached the revolving doors, and the storm wrote its name across the glass. Maya Hale said, "He knew about Lila's letter," and lightning answered like a witness. Elias Reed said, "We protect your past to save your future." Dana Brooks said, "I will subpoena every fingerprint that touched that locker." Jax Rivera said, "I saw who carried the box," and his voice cut through rain like bright wire. Victor Lang paused at the threshold, watching their shapes refract in the glass. Maya Hale said, "Tell me, then tell me twice so I believe it." A bus roared by, drowning nuance with diesel thunder. Thong finally stopped, and the silence felt like a lie taking a breath. They stepped into the rain, and the city swallowed their outlines. Jax Rivera said, "The box left with a badge that didn't beep." And truth sparked. Elias Reed said, "Then it was borrowed authority," and he led them toward the curb. Dana Brooks said, "I know whose badge still opens dead doors." Maya Hale said, "Lila wrote that name once, then crossed it out, and the letter burned in her pocket." Victor Lang's car eased away, taillights bleeding into puddles. Sirens braided with thunder, like old conspirators. The courthouse clock chimed a late hour that everyone ignored. Maya Hale said, "We start with the name," and fear finally had a map. Morning found Maya counting breaths like coins she could not spend. Maya Hale said, "I will not break before noon," and the lie was gentle. The city steamed after rain, and traffic hissed like cautions. She stirred coffee. She would never finish, watching the swirl fail to bind. Elias Reed said, "Eat something," and set a granola bar down like a verdict. Dana Brooks said, "We meet the clerk at 10, and her schedule held the room together." Jax Rivera ghosted the doorway, sketchbook tucked like a blade. Victor Lang lingered in headlines that refused to name him. And Maya Hale said, "Lila kept a map I never learned to read." Her phone displayed the unknown number as if it were a mirror. She pressed the sealed letter flat, and felt its quiet heat. The day opened its throat for them, And still, she whispered, no. They drove to the river overlook where memory kept its own weather. Maya Hale said, I come here every year, and the railing felt like a question. Wind combed the water until it forgot its face. Elias Reed said, tell me about the last day you saw Lila. Maya Hale said, she hummed a tune that wasn't finished. The words opened a private room and let the air out. Dana Brooks said, grief edits tape, but her voice was gentler than law. Jax Rivera sketched the skyline, mapping silence in lines. Victor Lang existed in the distance like a rumor with a chauffeur. Maya Hale said, I kept her letter sealed because it keeps me sealed. A gull shrieked like a sudden objection, and then drifted on. The unknown number stopped calling and felt more dangerous for it. At the legal clinic, fluorescents buzzed like anxious bees over old files. Maya Hale said, we need the intake logs before the purge. The clerk shrugged in a language built of policy and fatigue. Elias Reed said, preservation, request submitted at 9:02. Dana Brooks said, show received stamp, and placed the form like a blade. Jax Rivera drifted to the corkboard and found a torn flyer. Jax Rivera said, this badge repair notice lists a serial range. The numbers matched the ghost of their missing chain. Maya Hale said, Lila hated broken lanyards, and broke on the word, hated. The clerk said, you did not hear this here, and slid a box label across. Corridors seemed to lean in to catch the secret's weight. The purge timer kept walking and did not look back. They ate lunch that tasted like strategy and cardboard. Elias Reed said, you are not alone, and his voice poured warmth into cold places. Maya Hale said, warmth burns if you stay too close. He smiled with patience that had history inside it. Dana Brooks said, I will chase the serial list across departments. Jax Rivera said, I can get the rest from a back door, and dared them to forbid it. Elias Reed said, no crimes today, but his eyes weighed exceptions. Maya Hale said, I need to know if Lila chose to vanish. The question shook the table without moving it. Outside, sirens sketched red question marks across glass. The unknown number texted a single comma, and the pause felt like a trap. They returned to Maya's apartment where the light remembered last night. Maya Hale said, if the letter is a fuse, I will not light it alone. Elias Reed said, then we read it when you choose. And the word when built a bridge. Dana Brooks said, I found a badge in the serial range on a dormant roster. Jax Rivera said, name it, and his impatience sparked against the air. Dana Brooks said, Miles Kerr, facilities, access revoked 2 years ago. The room pivoted like a lens snapping to focus. Maya Hale said, Lila met a Miles at a city art fair. History flickered alive like a film frame catching light. The unknown number finally sent a single word that fit too well. It said, remember. The sealed letter grew heavier than any verdict. The facility's sub-basement breathed like a sleeping animal behind steel doors. Maya Hale said, Miles Kerr worked here, and dust answered with sneezed sunbeams. Elias Reed said, we keep this clean, but his smile faltered in the dark. Dana Brooks said, badge logs show motion at 2:13 and her pen tapped code. Jax Rivera said, locks remember hands, and slid a paperclip into a scarred latch. The corridor tasted of bleach and old storms. Maya Hale said, if Lila trusted him, I need to know why, and the letter throbbed in her pocket. Elias Reed said, we proceed by the book, while his gaze measured shortcuts. Dana Brooks said, evidence lives and dies by timing, and watched her watch. Jax Rivera said, doors thinking about it, and the latch surrendered with a sigh. Inside, shelves held gray boxes like compliant graves. Something small clicked awake behind the lights. The security office hummed with monitors that preferred secrets to light. Dana Brooks said, playback 2:13, and the feed answered with a polite blackout. Maya Hale said, that is not an accident, and her breath left frost on the screen. Elias Reed said, retention policy is 30 days, and the timer showed 29 and change. Jax Rivera said, "Look at reflection in the exit cam," and pointed to a ghost badge. The silhouette wore the shape of permission, not a face. Dana Brooks said, "Manual deletion needs 2 approvals," and her jaw made a small stone. Elias Reed said, "Then the system is lying," and his warmth cooled by a degree. Maya Hale said, "Lila warned me about mirrors and felt the comma in the text become a hook. A printer whirred and produced a page without names." The office smelled of melted plastic and denial. They found the gray box with a seal that looked new in a room that was old. Maya Hale said, "This label was printed yesterday, and the font smelled wrong." Dana Brooks said, "Chain tag references a retired docket," and her pen underlined the lie. Elias Reed said, "We should not open it here," and the rule sounded thin. Jax Rivera said, "Rules keep wolves fed," and slid a blade under the tape. The lid lifted on empty foam and one brass key. Maya Hale said, "Lila kept keys to songs, and grief tuned the room." Dana Brooks said, "Key stamp reads MP17, and her eyes hardened." Elias Reed said, "Municipal power substation," and the word power held echoes. Jax Rivera said, "Someone packed silence with a clue and pocketed the foam." The lights fluttered, as if the building remembered a promise. Wind bullied the fence around the substation and painted sparks in memory's colors. Maya Hale said, "If Lila stood here she was waiting," and rain stitched the gravel. Elias Reed said, "We move fast, we move quiet," and scanned the cameras. Dana Brooks said, "Badge pad is dead, but the gate listens to old stories." Jax Rivera said, "MP17 open service lockers," and the brass key turned like a verdict. The locker held a drive wrapped in electrician's tape and a photo. Maya Hale said she is smiling like she knows the punchline, and the smile hurt. Dana Brooks said, "Photo shows Victor Lang at a gala beside a facilities donor, and ink bled." Elias Reed said, "We leave no fingerprints," and snapped a glove tight. Jax Rivera said, "The drive hums when I tilt it," and fear hummed back. Sirens wrote new lines in the dark. Back in the car, the city pressed its ear to their windows and listened. Maya Hale said, "If this drive lives, the verdict can die," and her hands stopped shaking. Elias Reed said, "We clone it offline," and the route rerouted itself in his eyes. Dana Brooks said, "Chain will hold if we log this minute," and tapped time into a notebook. Jax Rivera said, "Victor buys donors who buy doors," and pointed to the gala pin. The unknown number texted, "Do not plug it in." The warning arrived like a held breath breaking. Maya Hale said, "Lila would plug it anyway," and the letter felt warm again. Elias Reed said, "We test on a clean box," and chose caution that sounded brave. Dana Brooks said, "Or we watch it burn safely," and produced a Faraday pouch. Jax Rivera said, "I can hear it purr," and the car went very quiet. They set up the clean box in a borrowed back room, where the walls smelled like dust and lemon. Dana Brooks said, "Airplane mode, power isolated," and the ritual steadied her hands. Elias Reed said, "No network, no mistakes," and his calm drew borders. Jax Rivera said, "If it screams, I am pulling the plug," and held the Faraday pouch like a net. The drive mounted with a sigh that felt almost human. Maya Hale said, "Lila, talk to me," and the cursor blinked like a pulse. A directory bloomed with files named after months that never were. Dana Brooks said, "Encrypted partitions, decoy top layer," and her finger traced a path. Elias Reed said, "We start with March 13th, and clicked the one that trembled. A video opened on a hallway with a mirror, pretending to be a door. Jax Rivera said, "Pause, zoom the badge reflection." The approval screen showed 2 names, and one was Dana. Silence collapsed the room and left the hinge squealing in their chests. Maya Hale said, "Say it," but the words wobbled like bridge cables. Dana Brooks said, "My login appears there," and built a careful island. Elias Reed said, could be spoofed, but his voice found no purchase. Jax Rivera said, timestamp matches the blackout, and the cursor hovered like a hawk. Maya Hale said, was it you? And the question shook nothing and everything. Dana Brooks said, I authorized a review 6 months ago to stop a purge, and the admission dented the air. Elias Reed said, you should have told us, and the warmth cooled. Jax Rivera said, Miles Kerr signed the second approval, and the room tilted. The drive offered a second clip like a dare. Maya Hale said, play it, and braced for the undertow. The second clip began with the sound of a distant elevator, and ended with a confession that forgot it was one. Miles Kerr said, you said the funder wants no noise, and the camera saw only his shoulder. Dana Brooks said, we freeze it, we catalog later, and the tone wanted to be law. Maya Hale said, you protected the chain by breaking it, and the sentence tasted like iron. Elias Reed said, who was the funder? And the question turned on a single screw. The frame caught a glittering lapel pin that belonged to Knightley's speeches. Jax Rivera said, gala pin, Victor Lang's circuit, and the word sparked. Dana Brooks said, I took his meeting to keep him visible, and the strategy felt like smoke. Maya Hale said, he made you the second key, and the key fit too well. The file ended with a date that matched Lila's last message. No one moved until the fan clicked. They stepped into the alley where the night stored its broken instruments. Maya Hale said, you promised to be the ground, and the accusation found a target. Dana Brooks said, I traded inches to stop a fire, and her breath fogged regret. Elias Reed said, that is how fires eat cities, and his voice cut clean. Jax Rivera said, Victor gives out water that smells like gasoline, and the image fit. The unknown number texted, he collects favors like rain, and the typing dots pulsed. Maya Hale said, Lila warned me to avoid mirrors, and the alley offered 10. Dana Brooks said, I thought I could watch him without blinking, and her eyes burned. Elias Reed said, we need to flip him into the light, and strategy returned. Jax Rivera said, then we bait him with his own pin, and pocketed the glitter. The night listened like a practiced witness. Back at the table, the drive revealed a folder named Hum that sounded like a secret song. Maya Hale said, Lila hummed when she solved puzzles, and the title unlocked a phrase. Elias Reed said, hidden user metadata, and lines of names unfolded. Dana Brooks said, there are 2 Lilas here, and the map redrew itself. Jax Rivera said, alias and birth name, and the cursor hovered on a surname that rang. Maya Hale said Lang, and the room lost its air for a beat. The document showed a guardianship that began in a house with mirrors. Elias Reed said, Victor is not only the funder, and the verdict shifted underfoot. Dana Brooks said, he owns her story on paper, and the paper cut bled. The unknown number sent a final line that shook loose the last pretense. It read, remember me as I was before he named me. The letter in Maya's pocket went hot. The courthouse chambers swelled with bodies that smelled of rain and nerves. Maya Hale said, he cannot own her name, and her fists stayed shut in her lap. Elias Reed said, we prove chain of evidence tonight, and his voice steadied the air. Dana Brooks said, the judge cannot dismiss physical custody records, and her pen snapped in half. Jax Rivera said, pins can buy doors, but doors cannot bury keys, and the sketchbook opened to reveal a courtroom rendered in charcoal. Victor Lang entered with a glide that muted sound itself. Maya Hale said, he wore this smile when I was still Lila's sister, and grief blurred into rage. The gavel had not yet struck, but the verdict already felt alive. Dana Brooks said, we played the drive only once, and fear leaned close to listen. The screen flickered, and the first frame loaded like a blade unsheathed. The drive played, and the silence thickened until it almost rang. Miles Kerr said, I signed because Victor promised the chain would hold, and his voice cracked in pixelated fragments. Dana Brooks said, that timestamp crushes his defense, and her jaw locked. Elias Reed said, "The court will choke on this," and his eyes never left the judge. Jax Rivera said, "Zoom the reflection," and the projector caught Victor's pin shining like a confession. Maya Hale said, "Lila circled his name once, and she felt the letter shift like fire." Victor Lang said, "Objection, fabricated," but the clip answered him with his own shadow. The judge said, "Motion noted," but the gavel leaned closer to truth. The gallery murmured like a hive stirred awake. Dana Brooks said, "The chain holds," and the room stiffened with weight. Maya Hale said, "Then justice has a voice," and pressed the sealed letter flat. The judge called recess, but the storm inside refused to leave. Maya Hale said, "Every word echoes Lila," and the hallway bent around her. Elias Reed said, "Do not let the weight break you," and his hand hovered near hers. Dana Brooks said, "Lang will offer settlement in shadows," and she tore the thought apart. Jax Rivera said, "He is afraid of mirrors," and he flipped his sketchbook to reveal Lang's face fractured in lines. Maya Hale said, "I lived half a life hiding," and the sealed letter pressed hotter. Elias Reed said, "If you read it now, it changes everything," and the pause thickened. Dana Brooks said, "Wait until the recorders run," but her eyes betrayed fear. Jax Rivera said, "Truth burns cleaner if read aloud," and the words glowed. The unknown number texted one more line. "He cannot erase her voice if you give her yours." Back in session, the gallery leaned forward as if gravity belonged to the trial. Maya Hale said the sealed letter was written by Lila herself, and she placed it on the table. Elias Reed said, "We request it entered as evidence," and his voice cut clean. Dana Brooks said, "I caution this changes jurisdiction," but the gavel snapped permission. Jax Rivera whispered, "Burn or breathe," and the words quivered. Maya Hale unfolded the envelope with trembling steadiness. The letter read, "If he owns my name, I vanish. If you read this, I chose to fight." Victor Lang shifted, his jaw tightening like a trap sprung. The judge said, "Proceed," and the record became history. Maya Hale said, "Her words return what he stole," and her throat trembled, but did not fall. The gallery erupted like a hive split by light. Lang's smile cracked, and silence fell sharp. The climax struck like lightning in a jar. Victor Lang rose, his control slipping through cracks. Victor Lang said, "Without me, she would never have survived," and the lie rang hollow. Maya Hale said, "You caged her voice to fatten your power, and fire replaced fear." Elias Reed said, "His guardianship was leverage, not love," and his warmth turned blade. Dana Brooks said, "Chain of custody proves fraud," and her pen underlined history. Jax Rivera said, "Look at him, mirror man breaking," and his words pierced. The judge said, "The evidence sustains charges," and the gavel thundered true. Maya Hale said, "Lila's name belongs to her alone," and the chamber shook with release. Victor Lang sagged as if mirrors finally cracked around him. The gallery exhaled centuries in one moment. Justice did not end, but its teeth had drawn blood. The verdict was now a living wound. The courthouse emptied, but the storm stayed inside their bones. Maya Hale said, "Verdicts don't stitch the wound," and she held the letter like ash. Elias Reed said, "It bought us air to breathe," and his voice folded into the rain. Dana Brooks said, "Lang will file appeal before morning," and her pen scratched invisible signatures on the air. Jax Rivera said, "He's cracked, not gone," and his eyes darted to every shadow. Maya Hale said, "Lila's words are free now," and her chest lifted as if it remembered lungs. Elias Reed said, "Justice never arrives whole," and his hand brushed hers without stain. Dana Brooks said, "Chain of custody ends here," though her eyes knew better. Jax Rivera said, "Chains don't end, they bend," and the echo rang true. The courthouse clock chimed midnight, a sound too heavy for freedom. Rain polished the steps, but they carried their scars. They gathered in Maya's apartment where silence hung heavier than furniture. Maya Hale said, "The letter is no longer mine," and placed it on the table. Elias Reed said, "It is evidence and elegy," and his voice softened at the edges. Dana Brooks said, "Custody chain will absorb it, but so will history," and her words quivered. Jax Rivera said, "Letters never belong to courts," and his sketchbook caught the light. Maya Hale said, "I feared opening it, but now I fear closing it again," and her voice fractured. Elias Reed said, "We carry truth like broken glass," and the shards glinted between them. Dana Brooks said, "Lang will twist his mirrors again," and her certainty weighed the room. Jax Rivera said, "Mirrors break easier once cracked," and hope flickered in his eyes. Outside, thunder retold the verdict louder than memory. They sat together, each holding silence like a weapon. Morning cracked with headlines that burned brighter than the storm. Maya Hale said, "Nationwide." They read Lila's words, and the paper shook in her grip. Elias Reed said, "Public opinion bends verdicts faster than law," and he sipped cold coffee. Dana Brooks said, "Editorials already call for reform," and her exhaustion smiled. Jax Rivera said, "Justice tastes like ink and noise," and he drew sirens on the margin. Maya Hale said, "Lila exists again in their mouths," and her chest softened. Elias Reed said, "Lang's empire erodes one headline at a time," though his eyes stayed sharp. Dana Brooks said, "We will face his appeal," but her voice carried less weight. Jax Rivera said, "He fears the name more than the verdict," and the truth hummed. The unknown number stopped ringing, silence now an answer. Outside, clouds tore open, light spilling like reluctant grace. They walked to the river overlook where grief met water in restless dialogue. Maya Hale said, "This is where I always waited," and her hands pressed the railing. Elias Reed said, "Now you are not alone," and his gaze lingered on the horizon. Dana Brooks said, "Truth changes weather," and her breath fogged in the wind. Jax Rivera said, "Water remembers," and he tossed a charcoal page that blurred into ripples. Maya Hale said, "She hummed a tune unfinished," and the air bent softer. Elias Reed said, "We will finish it in her name," and his vow sank deep. Dana Brooks said, "Lang cannot silence rivers," and conviction filled her. Jax Rivera said, "Or sketches that never stop," and his grin cracked shadows. The sun cut through clouds, gilding their scars with reluctant gold. For a heartbeat, grief felt like a song still playing. That night, quiet came like an uninvited guest who refused to leave. Maya Hale said, "Justice does not end, it transforms," and her eyes fixed on the city lights. Elias Reed said, "Every scar writes the map forward," and his hand lingered near hers. Dana Brooks said, "Tomorrow, the appeals, the noise, the shadows return," and fatigue thickened her words. Jax Rivera said, "But tonight, the city breathes with us," and he drew its skyline with restless strokes. Maya Hale said, "Lila would laugh at this silence," and the sound almost reached them. Elias Reed said, "She is in every word you spoke," and the truth softened his face. Dana Brooks said, "Victory and loss wear the same mask," and the mask cracked briefly. Jax Rivera said, "We broke his mirror," and his voice carried weight beyond years. Outside the city glowed alive, refusing to forget. Dawn arrived like a verdict that refused applause. Maya Hale said, "Today I return her name to the river," and the words steadied her breath. Elias Reed said, "We file the injunction to lock his mirrors," and his certainty felt earned. Dana Brooks said, "Appeal arguments begin next week," and resolve braided with regret. Jax Rivera said, "The city is listening for a last chord," and he tapped his sketchbook spine. The unknown number had fallen silent, but its silence shaped the room. Maya Hale said, "Lila taught me to sing without permission," and the letter lay open on the table. Elias Reed said, "You carried fire and did not burn," and the warmth held. Dana Brooks said, "We will keep the chain intact, even when the crowd wanders," and duty kept pace. Jax Rivera said, "Names outlive the mouths that steal them," and the line landed like truth. They returned to the sub-basement to seal the evidence with daylight watching. Maya Hale said, "Rooms remember hands," and she traced Dust's thin script. Elias Reed said, We document every hinge and shadow, and his camera clicked like law. Dana Brooks said, Miles Kerr will testify to Lang's approvals, and certainty sharpened her tone. Jax Rivera said, I will sketch the angles the cameras missed, and his charcoal scratched courage. The air hummed like a transformer holding its breath. Maya Hale, said Lila, stood here once without a witness, and the box lids looked smaller. Elias Reed said, now 4 of us carry the scene, and the balance felt right. Dana Brooks said, chain labels updated and countersigned, and the pen moved cleanly. Jax Rivera said, wolves hate daylight, and he smiled thin. The lock turned, and the room exhaled a long withheld sigh. At the river overlook, the city's pulse steadied into something like promise. Maya Hale said, I came here yearly to survive, and the railing felt less like a sentence. Elias Reed said, survival turned into testimony, and the wind carried it onward. Dana Brooks said, reform petitions crossed 100,000, and numbers grew bones. Jax Rivera said, I drew a map that ends here and begins here, and he tucked the page under the rail. The water threw back a broken sky that looked mended. Maya Hale said, Lila's humming, found a key I never heard, and the tune rose thin. Elias Reed said, keep singing when the crowd quiets, and his eyes held the horizon. Dana Brooks said, the appeal can delay, not erase, and her spine settled tall. Jax Rivera said, mirrors sink in rivers, and a sun shard agreed. Evening folded over the courthouse like a careful flag. Hanib, Maya Hale said, he will still move pieces in dark rooms, and her calm did not flinch. Elias Reed said, dark rooms loosed a paper and light, and he lifted the filings. Dana Brooks said, I once believed leverage could be moral, and truth softened her edges. Jax Rivera said, I used to draw heroes as mirrors, and he snapped the pencil clean. The steps held the echo of yesterday's thunder, as memory rather than threat. Maya Hale said, I will not visit only on anniversaries, and the vow fit her bones. Elias Reed said, we built a door where there was a wall, and the hinge sang inside the words. Dana Brooks said, I will testify against the person I once trusted, and courage stood up. Jax Rivera said, we carry the last frame into tomorrow, and no one disagreed. Night settled, and the city blinked like a patient heart. Maya Hale said, I kept your letter closed to keep myself closed, and the confession landed softly. Elias Reed said, you opened both, and neither shattered, and his smile traveled no farther than necessary. Dana Brooks said, I will spend years undoing my compromise, and she did not look away. Jax Rivera said, I was waiting to be chosen, and he let the sketchbook rest. The phone finally lit with a last message from the unknown number. Maya Hale said before he renamed you, I remember you, and her voice did not shake. The screen read a single line shaped like a door half open. It read, leave the mirror where it is, and walk past it. The river's hum reached the window like a lullaby that knew better. The gavel echoed once more, but no hand held it.